My sister Amelia was always dealt the worst possible cards in life, and unfortunately, I was always too young to ever do much to help her. I was only 13 when she got knocked up by her boyfriend, then at 19. Back then, Mom and I thought Thom was just a troublemaker, and that it wasn't fair that Dad disowned her. I actually still think that she needed us more than ever back then, and I resent Dad for everything she went through. But it's too late for that now. Thom promised Amelia that they would manage. They'd both get more shifts at the respective grocery store and fast food restaurant they worked at. The three of them would make it with so much love. He absolutely forbade her from getting an abortion. Again, another thing I couldn't possibly understand, being so young at the time. He changed his mind about loving his kid 3 months after my nephew was born. Thom left a jobless Amelia and their newborn son Finn all on their own. That's when Mom convinced Dad to take Amelia back, at least for a while. I know it's damn selfish of me to say that, but Finn was a pain in the ass, always screaming and smelling like poop. He was a sickly kid too, and the moment I started having sleepless nights over my sister's baby was the moment I decided I'd never have kids myself. Dad gave Amelia 3 months to get back on her feet. She worked her ass off, while Mom and I took turns taking care of Finn. I always felt there was something wrong with that baby. He was so ugly and unpleasant. It felt almost menacing to be alone with him. I feel horrible for not loving my nephew, but despite hating being around that strange kid, I gave my best to aid my sister. I didn't want her to leave, and I couldn't understand why she wouldn't just give the baby to Thom, who wanted it so much, and just move on with her life. Things might have been so much different for our family if she could do as 14-year-old me told her. But then again, a while later we learned that Thom had unexpectedly died just a few months after leaving Amelia, overdosed all alone behind the small grocery store he worked at. By the end of the deadline Dad had given her, Amelia managed to find a cheap house on Delaware Street. It was a place in the suburbs that had many empty lots, some of which seemed to formerly nestle some houses that burned down. But other than the seemingly ominous coincidence, it was probably a pleasant place to raise a child, full of brand new houses with long, decently manicured patches of grass. Having grown up in a small apartment, I envied Finn for his luck even, and I was too young to find strange that the rent was too cheap for such a nice place. I was the first one to hear about its peculiarity as I helped my sister move her stuff. The neighbor, an older lady that introduced herself as Auntie Roe, came to say hello and explained to us the only but very important rule they had. You absolutely cannot whistle when it's dark outside. For good measure, don't ever do it. I nodded. I didn't even know how to whistle anyway. Are you going to live here, kid? No, madam. I'm just helping my sister, I replied. I'll make sure to explain that to her then. And come here, I baked some goods for the new arrivals. Amelia's life ended up getting a lot better. Her neighbors were incredibly nice and helped her by babysitting Finn. My nephew's health even seemed to improve quite a lot. Auntie Roe and the others were always kind, except when I asked questions about the whistling. It was a rule to strictly follow, and that was all. Trying to pry more than that made them very fidgety, evasive, and even a bit unfriendly, eyes clouding over with fear. My sister met a nice man at the fast food restaurant she worked at, and in less than a year they were already planning to get married. His name was William, and at least to my young, unseasoned eyes, he seemed to be good to her. He even decided to adopt Finn as his son, which was incredibly cool as well. They barely lasted 2 years. Amelia and William decided to have a second baby shortly after getting married, mere 2 weeks after she gave birth to my second nephew, Noah. William was killed in a nasty car crash. Once again, my sister was a single mother, struck by tragedy, and all alone. Mom begged her to come back home, but things had been ugly between Amelia and Dad. Besides, the rent on Delaware Street was so cheap, she could still keep the house, and with it, a sliver of her pride, and the happy memories she shared with her husband. Things weren't so good between Mom and Dad either, and I've never really been a fan of Dad anyway, so it sort of was serendipitous for Mom and I that we decided to live with Amelia for a while and do stuff around the house while she took her time to mourn. I was already 16 and working part-time, so I gladly gave all my money to help my sister out just a little. Unlike it had been with Finn, I immediately grew fond of little Noah. He was such a smart and well-behaved baby, and his presence had the opposite effect of his older sibling. I felt calmer, almost mesmerized by his big brown eyes. Both Finn and Noah looked quite a lot like Amelia, chocolate eyes and hair contrasting explosively with fair skin, just like Dad. You couldn't even tell the boys had different fathers, since they barely inherited any physical feature from Thom and William. Unlike the four of them, Mom and I had slightly darker skin and blue eyes. And things weren't bad for me, except for one thing. When I was in Delaware Street, I could never ever sleep the whole night. I had restless dreams, and the only thing that ever calmed me down was getting up and staring at the static suburbia across the closed tempered glass window, the lazy streetlights, the parked cars slowly getting flecked with dew, the occasional faint movements behind the neighbors' translucent blinds. One of these nights, there was unusual activity in the house in front of ours, where an old man lived alone. Auntie Ro had told me that this particular neighbor, Mr. Davis, had recently found out he was terminally ill, so I started opening up my window to ask if he needed help. I stopped dead in my tracks as soon as I detected what kind of unusual activity he was engaging in. He was whistling. The next morning, when police asked around if there were any eyewitnesses, I didn't say anything. I was adamant on never telling a soul about what I'd seen. First, there was the noise, like the steps of a giant or of a god. That part many people could confirm, because unless you were blessed with being a heavy sleeper, it was impossible not to wake up to this sound, an already familiar harbinger of calamity for most. But you couldn't see anything, of course. There was no source for this sound. That much everybody on Delaware Street knew. Then came the swarm. Thousands, no millions of unknown little things, mysterious pieces of blackness and dread. They were like wasps, but each of them was covered in multiple eyes. I swear, I saw many of them staring deeply into my soul as I sat by the window, paralyzed with fear. But they didn't attack me, because I didn't whistle. It was like an inevitable judgment being passed down on whoever couldn't follow the one crucial but simple rule: never whistle after dark on Delaware Street. The swarm engulfed the house, consuming in a matter of seconds not only its walls and furniture, but its very substructure, and of course every living thing inside of it. There was no funeral, but the neighbors held a small reunion to tell Mr. Davis's kids, each older than my parents, about some of his last stories, his silly things like gardening and the kind of breads he had been into. I cried after Auntie Ro explained that he had given his cats to a teenage neighbor earlier that week, proof that he had deliberately chosen to break the rule. Why did he kill himself? He was so old anyway. I asked Auntie Ro later that day in the kitchen, while the two of us made my sister some oolong tea. Back then, I didn't understand how devastating a condition like his can be to one's soul. Beatrice, let me tell you something. Delaware Street is many things, but for people like him, it's a panacea, a place to go in your own terms, or if you want to be a pessimist, a place where you can die a difficult, unexplainable but quick death, even clean in a way. So, all the empty lots? Yeah. All families that whistled, intentionally or not. The swarm got 'em, she explained, very casually, then noted how wide my eyes were. Don't worry about telling the police. Everyone thinks it's bullshit. You're not the only one who's a habit of watching the empty street, you know. 7 months went by since Mr. Davis's death, and my sister didn't get any better. She just loved William too much, my mom explained to me. It's poisoning her soul. What can we do now? Should we get her a new boyfriend? I remember asking. God, I used to be so naive, dumb even. Mom and I were pretty much raising Finn and Noah at this point. Amelia was like a machine, going to work without batting an eye, then coming home and falling apart until the beginning of her next shift. Then one morning, there was a small improvement. She got a particularly generous tip at her work. We thought it was the start of something good. Mom, Beatrice, you've been too good. So I want to ask you something. She put a considerable amount of money in my hand, gently closing a fist around it. You two, grab Dad for me. I need to make peace with him. He was a piece of shit, but I want to start over, and I think he deserves to see his grandkids. So bring him here to let us talk, and go watch a movie. I know I'm overworking you, but I won't take no for an answer. An ominous thought crossed my mind. But she'd never do anything bad with her 2 sons in the house, right? Right? So Mom and I complied. We went and had fun while all the rest of our family was eaten alive in just a few seconds. The neighbors heard the whistling. There was no doubt it was Amelia's. Here's the note I found between the bills she handed me. Dear Beatrice and Mom, Dad is not a being that logic can explain, and I am not too. It's unfortunate that I ended up having 2 boys, each from a different father. When you look at Finn and Noah's angelic faces, it's hard to believe, but they cannibalize their dad's souls, which would have happened to Dad if I was a boy too. And since I'm not, I'm just a carrier of this terrible curse, and the boys will slowly feed on me until they're old enough to hunt by themselves, just like Dad did to his parents. But the swarm of Delaware Street? It's absolute. It's a hope to end this accursed bloodline. Please don't worry too much about yourself, Beatrice. You vowed not to have children, remember? So you'll be just fine, especially because you don't look a lot like Dad, so the blood is weaker on you. And please rest assured that I went peacefully and out of my own will. It's been 15 years since I lost my sister, nephews, and father all at once. Without the first 3 of them, Mom lost her will to live and faded fast. On her last moments, she reassured me that I shouldn't worry, because she wasn't even sure if I was Dad's daughter. For years, I've been looking for a doctor that will agree to sterilize me, but I'm broke, and I can't go too far. I'm stuck in a state that has yet to be introduced to the concept of reproductive rights. And then, what I feared the most happened. My boyfriend, the only man that I trusted, poked holes in the condom, and I found out I was pregnant. Now I'm on a lonely, urgent journey to handle it in the best way possible. If I don't succeed, I know that Auntie Rose's house has been empty since she passed a few years ago, so I'll have a place to go, quickly and on my own terms, and I'm not going alone. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. And tonight we have another little special no-sleep treat for you. This is a story by Polonium Poisoning, who also writes plenty of other awesome no-sleep stories as well. So if you like this story and you want to hear or read any more of their work, be sure to click on the link in the description, which will contain a link to the story, as well as a link to their profile where they submit all their work. As always, if you guys have any criticism for the way I did the video, or how I mixed the music or anything, please be sure to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. If you have any creepypastas, SCPs, or any other kinds of stories that you'd like me to read, please be sure to take a look in the description below. You will find links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts, and you can go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Fair warning though, I use my email and my Twitter a lot more than I use my Facebook, so it might take me a little bit to get back to you if you send me a message on Facebook. If you'd like to send in a story, true, fictional, or otherwise, please be sure to send me a message at one of those links. Be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, what the theme of it is, if it has any, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you do decide to send in a story, Please be sure to try to follow as neatly as possible the grammar rules so that it's easy to read. Please be sure to include as much description as possible as well, because sometimes people send in stories that are just a little bit too short to be read and they only take me about 30 seconds to read, and unfortunately those just aren't long enough to be put into a video. If you guys are curious about the music used in this video, it's always listed in the description below in the order which it appears, and I have links to all of the artists as well. Although I usually use Muji Music, so that's usually what you're going to find there. Last but not least, my friend Alan, who is a horror artist. He always makes all of the art for this channel, and perhaps the second channel that I've kind of been working on as well that I might unleash in the future. So if you like his art, please be sure to take a look in the description and check out all of his social media. I'm pretty sure he also does commissions as well, so if you want to get him to do something for you, please be sure to send that man a message, and I'm sure he will give you something you will not regret. Anyway guys, I think that's all for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.